Welcome. My name is Rebecca Lemos Sotero. I'm the Executive Director of Humanities DC and one of the partners in putting together this annual conference with the DC History Center. And this is my chance to just get to say a few quick words. If you don't know Humanities DC, we're the Humanities Council for the city. Every state has one. And so we're the one for DC. And half of the work that we do is grant making. And the other half of work that we do is public programming like this today. We also, for our grant making, we are always interested in finding people and organizations who are doing public humanities work and are looking for a partner to support that type of work. And for our public programs, we do work around community journalism, oral history. We also have monthly events called our Culture Series events that I hope that you all check out on our website, which is all around all kinds of topics in DC. I wanted to take this moment just briefly to say that as a Humanities Council for the city, we are closely tied to the National Endowment of the Humanities. And as many of you may know, this week, that was very much taken away from us. And so I was talking to Laura earlier yesterday, and I was like, I'm not quite sure what to say. And then we tabled this afternoon, and I got to speak to so many of you, and it was amazing to hear everyone's ideas and how passionate they were. And it reminds me just how wonderful and magical this conference is, because this is a group of people who really understand the importance of capturing the history, but also capturing the now, because people in the future need to know what's happening. And so in this moment, when there's lots going on for my team and for all other people doing this kind of work, I wanted to take this moment to thank you all for what you do, and thank this panel and this conversation that's about to happen, because it's just so important. So please make sure to visit us, come chat with us if you have any ideas, but otherwise I'm ready to pass the mic and have a lovely lecture.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dwight Franklin. I am the grandson of Letitia Woods Brown, and I'm excited to be here. And I want to thank the Humanities Council for all that you all are doing to keep her spirit alive and keep folks like all of us informed about history. And thank you to the panel as well. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of enlightening words for us as we move forward. My grandmother, I was born in 1971, and my grandmother died in 76, so I was 5 years old. I don't know a lot about her personally because I was 5 years old. But what I do remember is how she made me feel. You know, I don't remember the conversations, but I remember how I felt. I remember her picking me up from preschool and walking down the street coming home and feeding the squirrels, and I remember the smile on her face, and I remember her just looking at me, and I remember me running off somewhere, chasing the squirrels or the pigeons and the birds or digging in the ground or whatever I was doing at that time, and looking back at her and her just smiling at me. I remember how the warmth that I felt inside of me by being with her, and I still remember that to this day. And a lesson that I have now, nearly 50 years later, is the importance of how you make people feel. It's not often the words that we say. And it is often how we act, not the words, but how we act. You know, it could be a smile that you give someone as you're walking down the street. It could be opening the door for someone as they're coming in. Hi, how are you on the elevator? It's how you make people feel. And sometimes in life, as we move forward, we could have been going through something bad. And the feeling that you had from someone at a moment in time, a stranger walking down the street who just says hi to you, may resonate. Why? I don't know. The feeling, the spirit, whatever it is that moved you. That's what my grandmother did for me by the age of 5. And I still remember that to this day. She was born in Tuskegee, Alabama. And I heard stories from my mother and from my cousins. My mother's right here, Lucy Murray. And I've heard a lot of stories over the years about my grandmother. And being at Tuskegee, in the house that she lived on was only a few blocks from Tuskegee Institute at the time, now university. And I heard stories about George Washington Carver coming over every Thursday night to have dinner. And I was like, wow, George Washington Carver had dinner almost every Thursday. My grandmother was a little girl at the time. And I can only imagine what the imprint of that on her life. Her grandfather started Tuskegee Institute. And there started a line of educators. And from her, she ended up going to Tuskegee and then graduating and getting a PhD in history from Harvard. She was the first woman, period, of any color to get a PhD in history from Harvard. And I wonder what that would have been like, having been the first to do that. Today, as we are going through a transition in our country and the challenges that we're facing, as you just talked about, right, and many more, right, I sit back and I draw from the strength of my ancestors, and in particularly my grandmother. The book that she wrote was called Free Negroes in the District of Columbia from 1790 to 1846. This book sits in my office, and I look at it daily. Through her spirit, I have this physical book that allows me to reconnect with her, especially in these moments. And oftentimes I wonder now, what would she do? What would she say? What level of encouragement or wisdom from history would she be able to impart? Because the work that you all are doing here, the history and what you all are doing, is vital, especially in times like this. There's so much to learn from, to help us, guide us, and teach us, because history is not just in the past, it's in the present, and it's teaching us about the future. Every second is history. Every moment is history. And as we move in this life and in this journey that we're all moving through, we should, and I think that's why most of us are here, is what knowledge can we gain? What insight can we learn from the panels, from the discussions that can help us in this moment? Whatever that moment is for you. For me, it's how to move in this life and these changes that we're going through as a country, as a people. What inspiration can we draw from, and where can we draw it from, and whom can we draw it from that can guide us and move us as we're moving forward? And so my grandmother is that for me. She has been in my life. She's continuing to be in my life. I feel her in my life. And this book is a physical connection for me with her. And I thank her for the years that she put in, because I talked to my mom, and she said, yeah, for a period of her life, my grandmother wasn't there because she was working on this book. She was working on getting her PhD, and it's a sacrifice. And so as we move forward, don't forget, we've been through a lot. The historians have taught us this. We've been through much more, and we will get through this moment as long as we're working together. And that's the key. And as I look in the audience, I see young folks, I see seasoned folks, I see white people, black people, males, females, Hispanics, people from different cultures. I can just see by looking at folks, and it's going to take all of us together to move forward, not individually. None of us can do it by ourselves. And my grandmother knew that. She left legacy for us all to read. That's what all historians are doing. So I thank you for you all as historians laying down the foundation and the groundwork and continuing to educate us and to make the past relevant. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over. I don't know who this goes to. Who do I give the mic to? The speakers? All right. Awesome. Awesome.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Maurice, it's nice to see you again. Okay.
My pleasure, my brother.
I want to thank everyone for their comments. Thank you very much. I want to begin, Maurice, by linking our conversation to what's going on outside in terms of the protests. What impact will the dismantling of the National Endowment for the Humanities have on state humanities programs? And how will historical research be affected by the reduction or elimination of grants to scholars?
Thank you. First, let me thank the
Use that.
church.
Just put up. No, you were speaking without using the mic.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. But first, let me thank all of you all for coming. Let me thank the Historic Society of Washington. And, you know, I have 3 copies of Free Negroes in the District of Columbia. I have one that I keep with the rare books in the living room. I have one I keep in my office upstairs. It's all marked up. And I have one that I keep in my office at work. And I just picked them up. And each except the one in the living room one day, you know, be donated to a collection. So it's a great honor to be here for this talk. You know, I have been a recipient of grants. In fact, this book, I'll tell you later, is a direct result of me being at the Woodrow Wilson Center, which is a place that they closed down the other day at 5 o'clock. And it's somewhat, if you try to find logic, I don't know if you can find logic, because when the President of the United States closes down operations such as Radio Free Europe or Radio Marti, organizations which typically have been used to spread the notion that America is the only great country in the world, you know they will close down anything. And one reason, if you saw 60 Minutes the other night, the only reason they closed it down is because they had a talk where they questioned his isolationist policies. But today we have a policy that really tells you not to think. You know, a lot of basketball is on tonight, you know, and I've been watching it, and I don't know if you watched the games last night with the women's. And I always think back to what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says, and he had a conversation with Morgan Wooten, the great coach. And he said, you know, the importance of college is not going to learn what to think, but how to think. And therefore, it's the importance of our time is learn how to think about things, how to use research and knowledge, and that is what we've always done. And institutions that are being under attack are not radical institutions. They're institutions that allow for everyone to go and struggle. I don't know if anybody saw the New York Times about 2 weeks ago about the words which are the 200, 300 words which you cannot use today in modern discourse. Anyone see it? Go back and get it, New York Times. You remember some of the words? Race, women, disabled, autism, sex, invertebrate, all of these words, which means that. And then 2 days after that, you saw something else. You saw Elon Musk, and what did he say? He says that federal workers are as damaging to the country as Hitler was, as he gives a Hitler salute. Now you think about this, because if you live in Washington, D.C., you know the public workers have been the backbone of the city. Public workers who have been school teachers, firemen. You know that during the Marion Barry years that the African Americans were able to come and thrive in Washington, not because they were getting handouts, because they did the work that was necessary. Garbage workers, cafeteria workers, Library of Congress workers, Labor Department workers. And so all of this is just being under attack. And the big problem is that everyone thinks it's going to affect somebody else besides them. You remember the words of, I think, father in Germany? First they came after the communists, I said nothing. Then they came after the Jews, I said nothing. Then they came after me, and there was no one left. Well, pretty soon there will be no one left. So I tend to think that right now, if there's any time where people should speak up, to preserve our institutions, the Smithsonian. You know, when Lonnie Bunch said something, Secretary Bunch said something a while back, and he says that African-American history is American history. See, they try to tell us that there's something different. There's nothing in America that I know of that's been used to help black people that hadn't helped white people as much. You tell me. If you tell me that, I'll go in the well, I was going to tell a dirty joke about it, but if you tell me, I can't say it here. But welfare, many more white people get welfare. Shots, polio, all these things, many more whites get them. All this is a direct benefit of the Reconstruction, which established state schools. And so it is an attack upon not just democracy, but an attack upon us all. And sooner or later, pretty soon, it's going to affect large numbers of white people. People who may be at the methadone clinics, people who get that Social Security check. And then you will see, I think, a big awakening.
How do you, and I'm assuming the normal people here also might be teachers, how do we teach African American history during a period of erasure and intimidation? Okay, can you hear me again? I'll repeat the,
Well, look, I teach a course called Black Lives Matter. It just happened that I'm teaching this course this semester. And majority of the kids I teach at Georgetown. So, of course, the majority of them are going to be white. And we, we look back historically because there's nothing that I'm teaching them that is not about the history of America. So as I teach African American, my training is not in African American. I teach it, but it's really in the training of the 17th and 18th century African and American world, which you look at the development of concepts of people coming. You look at the ideas about race, and then you look about slavery. And you realize that slavery as an institution, while it did great harm to the black body, it did as much harm to the white man and distorted people. And so our role now is just simply to tell the truth. It is not a thing that I would ever say in class that I would not say here. It's not a thing I'd ever say in class about the culture of African American people. It's not a thing I wouldn't say in class about, if you read the New York Times the other day, you see, and Ethelbert and I were talking about the drastic number of African American men who are going to school. And you know how this is just, what it's doing to the race of people. And it also means, so many African American women, and we know African American women are killing it. But the brothers got to step up. And we see the danger of this because people are not getting these educations. And institutions have to speak up. Every school can't be like Harvard that will give, if anybody makes under $200,000, they will be able to go to school free. Schools like mine that claim they are not wealthy because they're not generational scholars, generational wealth at the Catholics and so forth. But we have a great danger now, I think, of, unless we do teach African American history as American history, the danger is that the nation will be a nation of dummies.
When looking back at our society, how it's changing today, what challenges might historians have in trying to sort through misinformation and lies?
Well, I think the main thing is just to tell the truth. Bill Clinton said something a couple of years ago, and if you think about it, he says, there's nothing that's wrong with American history, America, that what's right with America can't fix it. Now, he's part right and he's part wrong. But because we fought for it. What is good about America is the things we fought for. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, civil rights bills, housing rights bills. Historians just have to tell that. But any historian who thinks that because they're historians, they're going to change something in and of themselves. Do you know the other day, at Bancroft High School, you see what the teachers did? You might know what the teachers did. ICE went into the school, Bancroft, and that's the elementary school, over. And what did they do? These teachers said, no, you're not. And they said, now, I don't know if I have any of my colleagues in the history department are going to do that at Georgetown. I don't know. I will, because I grew up in the movement. I don't know. So we make statements, and we've had people make statements. And I was somewhere the other day, and somebody made statements, and then next thing I know, letter, oh, how heroic you are. Well, you're not heroic by you making a statement. You're heroic if you do something to try to change society. And so historians have to not just write about things, but they have to lead by example in certain ways too. We write great proclamations. We analyze very well, but we have to go a little bit more. You know that, you see, history can change very easily, and you can convince people to change. You don't think you can. Benjamin Franklin owned slaves. Benjamin Franklin said in 1760, almost every Negro is by the nature of slave. Yeah, almost every Negro is a thief. And he thought about it. And he started meeting with people like Anthony Benazet and Richard Allen and others like that, Absalom Jones. And he changed his mind. Almost every Negro is made by the nature of slavery a thief. See, he can change people's minds. If we couldn't change people's minds, we never would have changed the ideas around the American Revolution, where people came in with the notion that every African was inferior. You can change people's minds. But we have, and historians have to be a lead of that. But I'm afraid that in academics, you know, we get so caught up in themes and ideas, sometimes we forget. For example, I was reading the other day, Du Bois says, how does it feel to be a problem? Then I started reading. And do you know who quotes him and says it beautifully? It's Tupac Shakur. How does it feel in this world to be a problem? Now, so this young man is taking things, so historians have to take modern ideas and take things and put them. Now, we've seen a lot of writings in New York Times and places like that, but I'm not so foolish to think that I'm going to, but we have to work with, you know, with ours, and starting off with the young people. Do you know today in Washington, D.C., 90% of black kids do not go to school with white kids, 90% of white kids do not go to school with black kids. I came here over 40 years. It's worse now than it was. This is not. You can't blame this on Trump. You have to blame this on we in the city. 90%, which means that these young kids would not grow up learning about other people.
Maurice, we often hear about the importance of storytelling. When might storytelling conflict with facts? Is there an ethical code a historian should follow when writing a book?
Well, you know, I was talking to, anybody know who Bill Lucy is? Bill Lucy, the great trade unionist. He's a dear man. So Bill said, Maurice, come by the house sometime and let's swap lives. And what he meant, but we also said that, you know, a dude, Abraham and others know it, when you're 40, or you know, when you're 20, you play football. And you ran and you made one touchdown. By the time you're 30, you in that game, it's 2 touchdowns. By the time you're 50, you had 8 touchdowns in the game. You see, so, but those are harmless stories. And there are stories that can tell lessons. Some of the great stories, when I wrote this book, I talk about 3 great storytellers. And I had finished, it's a long story, but I had finished a very long book on Washington, D.C. called Halfway to Freedom. And the publisher says it's too long. You have to take some of it out. So you know, whenever I get bothered, I do 2 things. You know, I'm at Georgetown, and the priest, my best friend there is a priest, and we were talking, he said, you don't, and I said, well, you know, Father, you have 2 things I don't have. He said, what's that? I said, you have whiskey, and you have Jesus. And he says, well, I can help you with both. And so, you see, it's a story. You tell a story. And so when I was thinking about this book, I went with my kids and wife to Cambridge, Maryland, and I had just read Tyra Miles' a great book on Harriet Tubman. I'd read Larry Tyson's great book on Satchel Paige, and I read Ricky Ricardo's great new book on Louis Armstrong. As I'm reading about these great storytellers, and I have an imaginary conversation of walking in the woods with Harriet Tubman, because she was a great storyteller. And oh, Frederick, let me tell you another story. And she would, you know, as she would go to Metropolitan AME Church at 16th and L, the pew was there. And I realized the value of telling good stories. And music is nothing but a story. Coltrane is telling a story. Coltrane writes a song, Alabama. And some people said, oh, it could not have been about the girls killed. Now, what do you mean? It's 1963. What else is it going to be about? But he's telling the story through music. So did Gershwin and so did others. So did Shakespeare. When he's writing about Othello, he's writing The Tempest. He's telling the story of colonialism. Now, so the true story. And so I can tell stories through history, and I find out I'm not bad. I cannot tell a joke for the world, but I can tell stories. But stories you can remember them. Jokes you have to remember punchlines and all that. And jokes can also. But then I was looking at Dave Chappelle the other day, and I know everybody's mad at the brother because he does some things that he shouldn't do. But anybody see him on Saturday Night Live the other night? This guy was killing it. He was telling a story, and what was his story? That some people care more about the house in Palisades than they care about the people dying in Gaza, in Palestine. A comedian can tell a story. You remember Lenny Bruce and many others could tell, and they could talk about reality. Richard Pryor, great storyteller, some of the stuff, but if you listen to it, even Miles Mabley, who nobody knows but Ethelbert. So history is just the great story of a people. And you have to figure out a way to tell it in such a way. You know, you have to figure out difficult concepts and make them that people can understand. If you write something nobody can understand, that was the beauty of Jesse Jackson. You see, whatever. The brother could take a difficult concept about Wall Street, you know, take something, you know, we may be in different ships now, but we all came in the same boat. Or people, he took these difficult concepts. He thought this man was studying, and then put them where people can understand it. That's what historians have to do.
Maurice, why is DC history important, and what topics, individuals, or periods have been overlooked?
So I wrote this long book. It's called Halfway to Freedom. And why I call it Halfway to Freedom, it's about DC because as a teacher Brown, we had written about the role of free Negroes. They can't hear you. Oh, they can't hear me?
Just speak into the mic for me.
Oh, okay. So I got this voice. So I got a voice. I was somewhere the other day, and I was sitting down talking with this guy. And he's much bigger than me, but his voice carried about 2 steps, and my voice carried, so I figured it. But anyway, but you have, you know, so many. Now, D.C., so I wrote this book, and the reviewer said, tell me why D.C. is different. And I'm thinking, I've written 800 pages. And I've told this man, and they're so busy trying to make a point in review, I've told you, I'm not meaning Ethelbert, I told you that how was D.C. established? It was established because from a state of Maryland and Virginia, 67 square miles square, 31 square miles, formed the District of Columbia. And it abided by the laws of those states. So slavery existed in D.C. for a long time. It's built on slavery. Its fundamentals were built on slavery. George Washington, who came, wanted to be so. When Lafayette LaFont designed the city, and he did not want to use slave labor, he got sacked. So it's built upon this. Washington, D.C. is going through many configurations, but always as a sort of a colony. It's not a colony in the sense we use the term a colony. It's not a Guam. It's not American Samoa. But many things happen a similar way. It doesn't have any rights. It has no rights. You remember what Taney said? Blacks have no rights that whites have to. And that's the way we're being treated now. We have no rights, but now it's affecting whites. You have no rights anybody else has to respect. And so D.C. is built upon that. But fundamentally, we've made a lot of mistakes, along the way. When Washington was given the right to 1973, and at the same year that Bernice Reagan found Sweet Honey in the Rock. And what does the song say? We who believe in freedom should not rest. See, this is a story of Bernice Reagan telling this story for Snake Right. And at almost a moment, there was a possibility that we could have gotten statehood. But at that very moment, the people who were running D.C., including some blacks, opted for something called the Voting Rights Amendment that didn't pass. So we missed a particular moment. Will the moment come back? Remember 3 years ago, everybody was saying statehood is coming. Well, it didn't. And the only reason people thought statehood was coming, you know why they thought it was coming? Can you tell me you know why? Because you remember what Ted Kennedy said. You would never get certain rights because D.C. is the 4 twos. Too black, too poor, too urban, too liberal. But he can't say that now, can he? But you're still not getting statehood. It's not too black. It's not too poor. Don't you think that every young white person, excuse me, young whites, excuse me, I don't mean it, but don't you think that every young white comes in D.C. is liberal? No, sir. I can tell you they're not. I have people on my street, wonderful people, just moved. The first thing you do is petition so the kids will not have to go to the neighborhood schools. Now the baby's 2 months old. So you see, we have so D.C. is and now even the people running Congress don't quite know because they're waiting for Trump to tell them what to do on this, because they know the DC, the money DC raises is his own money. They know that we had the control board, and we had the control board. The way this city went. You know what the population of Washington, black population of DC is now? You know what the percentage is? 42%. Thank you. 42%. 1957, the majority of blacks for the first city in America, over 50%. 1970, 70%. And think of the institutions, Truman Spear, and the Colony Theater, and all those places. I mean, it was beautiful. But then things changed over time, and because within the city we've done so much to try to make the city beautiful. The city is beautiful. It's much more beautiful than when I came. Look at the housing by Howard University. That's some beautiful housing. But as my grandmother would say, not Negro one living there. When I'm in a group of and I said Negro now, Negro, I didn't say the other word, Negro, which is acceptable. It's not on the list. My grandmother raised me, so it was colored Negro, so she used the other word plenty of times. Boy, I don't want you to be a sorry-ass Negro like your father. So she used the other word. So I never used it, never in my life. It ain't nothing to do with white people. It had to do with that little lady who was the most wonderful thing God ever put on this earth, who just believed that name was of anybody who was. Trump would be one of those. He would be the epitome. So, but we have all this. I was with a group of buddies now. We go and, we listen to music, and and we went to U Street in front of Ben's Chili Bowl, and we took a picture. And we took a picture among this huge sign, as big as that thing back there, of Ellington. And then the gentrifiers came, tore down the sign, named the building Ellington that nobody can afford to live in. And we were happy. Today, we could do so much more with innovative programs that can provide housing and things, but we don't. And the people leave the city for several reasons, but we know why they leave. Education, one. You can't afford to live. Housing and jobs. But now this administration has done, do you know, at the Labor Department, where my wife's worked for many years, it decimated all programs that are going to give apprenticeship programs. You know, the majority of apprentices in this country are white. They're not black. They have to be. So all these programs that are affecting people, and all this affects, our city of Washington. But other things, go to U Street. How many black businesses can you count? You probably can count Brick's Flower Shop. It's been there forever. You probably can count Industrial Bank, and you probably can count Ben's Chili Bowls and the place next door. Well, now, you go up 9th Street, tons of Ethiopian businesses, little Ethiopian. I'm not mad at Ethiopians because they can harbor wealth. Why should I be? But what I'm mad at is the city has not created. When Bohemian Caverns closed, the city could have kept that building open. All they had to do was come out with a loan. Do you know that they gave the Franklin School, you know what the Franklin School is? Used to be the head of the Board of Education. They gave Freedman's wife over $50 million to keep that place open. You know what I'm talking about? In front of that beautiful park. When I first came, you know that was a pretty sketchy park, Franklin Park. You didn't walk in front of the track. No, man, not in front of that place. And right across from the Masonic. Well, but the city saved that place. But it could not save. So we just have sometimes our pride is wrong because we're too busy thinking about making the city beautiful instead of making it livable for people, poor black and African-American people. And you see the education gaps and things going up. We see the neighborhood changes, and it's, again, more beautiful, but it's not more beautiful for people who should have the right to stay here. And so that's why music and sports become so important. Can I say that a minute?
Not right now.
Oh, not yet. Oh, okay. I don't want us not to talk about I know they want to hear about music and sports. Okay, they don't want to hear me talking about that.
No, what I want you to do is go back and look at something you was talking about.
Okay.
if I was listening to you, you made a lot of statements about the city. And I'm looking at the role of the historian in shaping social policy.
Okay.
And I say that because at one time when I first met you, you ran for public office.
Yeah.
So talk about this relationship. Like, say, for example, many things you mentioned here. How could that be
Okay.
turned into legislation?
Okay. So I was at Georgetown one day giving a speech. It was a D.C. Emancipation Day. And I was talking about different things. And I give the city, but because I'm speaking about, I live in D.C., so I speak about the city, but it's also a kind of what the federal government could do too. But I'm talking about the city. So anyway, I gave this talk, and the mayor was there. This was Mayor Gray. And the president of Georgetown, Jack DeGioia, was there. So Gray said, and Gray is a Catholic. Father Kemp had married him, the legendary Father Kemp from St. Augustine Church. And so he said to the president, you mind if I talk to this fellow, Jackson, about this commission? So Marion Barry had formed a commission on African-American affairs because so many people were leaving the city. So the mayor's office called me and said, Jackson, would you mind being on this committee for African-American affairs? I said, well, and then the mayor got in the phone. I said, well, Mayor, two things Jackson don't do. He doesn't go to a lot of meetings. I've been in meetings all these years with Ethelbert, and maybe something changed. And I said, I don't go anywhere where you've already made the decision, because in D.C., people make the decisions. Maybe it's other places. But somebody say, hey, man, what do you think about this? Well, you've already made your mind up, so why are you asking me? It'll make you feel good. Well, it don't make me feel good. I go home, put on Coltrane, eat some dinner, watch some basketball film, but not because you asked me. So anyway, so he asked us to write this report. So I agreed. But what I did not realize was the city was not going to give me any aid, all these statisticians did not give me any help. So the president of the university, to his goodness, gave me a semester off. And I was able to go out and get statisticians, and we put together a report. And the report is on a report to the African American Commission of Washington, to the mayor. Mr. Gray had lost to Ms. Bowser. Ms. Bowser invited me in to give it, and I gave a report about all these things, economic problems. And the main problems are how we could solve certain things with better taxing policies, but also made a lot of recommendations. One recommendation I remember that the mayor said we can't do, and that was that, and maybe it was expedient, but it says, I said, you can turn some of these vacant apartment buildings into houses. And they came back with something, well, they aren't structured to do this. Well, I used to work on ships. I had done construction. I had done everything. And I know that if you can build a building, you can change the structure. All you got to do is knock out a couple of walls, change some pipes. It's not that hard. Not if you saw this SpaceX coming down from space the other day. You know you can do it. Well, now they're really thinking about doing it. The problem, one reason they didn't want to do it is because that meant you would have minority people coming downtown. And you wouldn't. Anybody ever walk downtown at night, down here? Anybody ever go to anybody? It is the most boring place. It is just dead. You go to a basketball game, maybe you go to a basketball game if you can afford to come out. I mean, you go to New York, the lights always, people are moving, but not here. Because they've taken people out. And so the idea was how to bring people, back to the inner city, but then the other problems too. High schools. Ballou built a whole new Ballou High School. Fired the principal named Rockman because when they opened it back up, the school was about third full. Why was it a third full? Because during the time the school was closed, you closed the housing projects, all the people went to, I can't say PG County, Prince George's County, Ward 9. You see, so the population had left. And so we haven't created, so the thing was, and I gave all kind of ideas about creating more housing, educational program, apprenticeship programs. What is the apprenticeship program? It's a program, for example, go into a pharmacy. Anybody ever go into a pharmacy? And these are good paying jobs. How many African-American people you see working behind the counter? Zero. Now, why not? Because we have not had programs to institute where black people can. Now, I'm not against anyone of any other nationality. I'm not against that. But I am for African Americans being able to have those opportunities. Anybody ever see these construction jobs out here? You ever look and see who's doing? You know what these talking about? Say black man won't work. He will work for $50 an hour. Yes, he will. But look, and who's getting the jobs? Very few African Americans, because the unions, and sometimes why the unions don't want African Americans? Because if you tell a brother, brother, and I used to work in Longshore, you can give me an order, but you're not gonna come at me and bark at me and call me names. You're not gonna do it. And these young black boys are not gonna take it. And some really don't want to work, but a lot of people do want to work. But they don't offer the jobs and these opportunities. You ever look in a crane? You ever see a crane way up there? You know how much that guy's making or lady's making in that crane? You know how much they're making? About $200,000, maybe $200,000 a year. They make as much as the man who wrecked that ship that came into the port of Baltimore. The man who driving that ship, that man made about $300,000 a year, working maybe 2 or 3 hours a night. He just messed up. But there are good jobs they don't allow African Americans to keep. And so jobs like that, and then education, the schools are closed. They spend $50 million or $100 million on, it's good, beautiful fields, but the schools are half full because you've not provided places for people to stay. And these are the things that we can do, that we can, sometimes we just get right silly. Man made a notion the other day to make go-go the music of Washington. Wonderful, great idea. Then they come with legislation, make D.C. the sports capital of the world, of America. How in the world is Washington, D.C., that hadn't won nothing in 20 years, the sports capital? New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia. See, we get real silly when we can just do things, of meaning. So I think that, so this report, now the problem is this report is done. It was done 6 years ago. Now I'm asked to redo it, to look at other things. But let me give you an example. The Reeves Building, the Reeves Building, which is, we all remember when it was new, beautiful. Marion Barry got it. You remember, what's the shoe shop guy's name? Fix Your Shoes?
Yeah, he's the last guy.
Duke was a nice guy. Duke, so I shine my own shoes, but see, Abraham, he takes his shoes to get shined, but I shine my own. I even iron my own shirts. You know why? Because my grandmother raised me.
Maurice, stop right there.
I'm going to tell you about jobs.
No, put the iron down. Okay, I'm going to ask you some questions about music. Okay. Before you get carried away. All right. Okay.
He asked me, didn't he?
And I'm going to stop you, too. So what I want to ask you, one of the things that's fascinating about your book, there's a lot of references to music and sports. And I want to pull out some things that could go overlooked. Talk about Donald Byrd and the founding of jazz studies at Howard University campus in 1968.
So you all know what's happening in 1968, the rise in Washington, D.C., Howard University, Donald Byrd comes. But what maybe you don't know is that jazz was not allowed at Howard University. The first person to play music at Howard University was Joseph Douglas, who was Frederick's grandson. And all the years, Madame Avante and many others came, but jazz was never allowed. Billy Eckstein goes to Armstrong High School, stays at Howard about 6 months, he can't sing, so he leaves. Benny Golson, Killer Joe, right, goes to Howard. He can't play. He leaves. And then Donald Byrd comes and brings his music, Rock Creek Drive, Gordon Park, and brings songs that Patrice Rush and all those. And they create this jazz program there. And then he brings in people like John Malachi, the great John Malachi, who's a D.C. native. And then he does the most beautiful thing. He brings the most brilliant, beautiful pianist who comes named Jerry Allen, who was just a wonderful. She died tragically. And so now Howard has this, but Howard also built upon what had been built at UDC before. Fred Irving went from UDC to Howard. Kevin Johnson went from Cardozo to UDC, and and Howard has created these great programs. See, this is the important thing. People think that when black people are good at something, are good at music, it's just because they're natural. We all are naturally gifted. We're musical naturally, but that don't mean we're good at it. We can all sing and hum. But what this showed people that African Americans were just as good structurally. They had to learn to read music. Wynton Marsalis, great player, but he has a Pulitzer and a Grammy in both classical music with Udita Grubova and jazz. All these people are just great culture, and that's what Howard showed, that people have to be good at something, but also you have to work at it structurally. And this is what the great Dvorak, this is what the great singer Lillian Evante, Madame Evante, who came here, this is what Marian Anderson and others showed us, that we have to learn the structures of music and then tie that in with our innovation. Donna Bird did that.
And then he would also create the Blackbirds.
He did it with the Blackbirds. And the Blackbird, you know, it's not the music I necessarily listen to, but it's music what the Jitterbugs listen to. Well, yeah, Ethelbert knows this. So.
You a jitterbug, man. So we'll talk about Tapa Carew and the new thing.
So you know, Tapa Carew came to Howard, and this great architect, and he was around, you know, Drum and Spear, with the great people that we know, Judy Richardson, Tony Giddens, who had been the head of the Mayor's Art Council, Cortland Cock, who did so much to bring black businesses in there, and Tapa Carew. And he created something called a new thing around, and he brought in, but the beauty of what he did, he used some of grant money, used that to create a program where young people could come and learn theater and arts. And he brought in other people, like the great Lou Stovall, who came and did poster art. And if you look at all the great concerts and things that are coming to D.C., and Lou Stovall has a summer arts program. This is before Marion Barry has these. And so this inspired Marion Barry to do these. You know what you can do if you help kids. And so Tapa Carew, who's trained as an architect, did that. But this led to what? This led to Monroe and others, Malone and others, and Peggy Cooper Cafritz starting at Duke Ellington School for the Art. But it's always inspired by Tapa, who was also inspired by Robert Hooks, who had the Old Colony Theater. At the same time, he had the Negro Ensemble, you know, because he was from Washington, D.C., from the West End. So all these things really have a connection.
Yeah, and I believe that Robert Hooks, his theater, that's where Sweet Honey in the Rock comes out as a workshop.
That's right, out of a workshop.
Yeah. Talk about, you know, many people talk, your book is about jazz and music. Many people hear music from radio. So talk about the importance of, say, WDCU, WHUR, WPFW.
Well, you know, the thing about radio is that the beauty of radio is that it makes you listen to different kinds of music. And I'll get off in 1 minute and I'll stop. As a kid, I didn't have, I live in the South, so you listen to, so I know as much hillbilly music as anything else. Your Cheating Heart Has Made Me Cry, I know all that, Royal Calf and all. So you listen to radio. Even today, if you turn on WPFW, listen to it, you don't want to hear something, you can turn it. You can listen to classical music, things like that. Well, PFW came here, 50 years ago, Denise Oliver and Sagidi Bride, and people started it. And it was a way for the community to be inactive, so it became jazz and community. And PFW radio, now before that, along with that, it was, those of you all know the beauty of it, they had Melvin Lenz and the Quiet Storm, and the love music and all this, and you had WDCU, you had music that, in this book that I put here, in the book before that, I brought together people like Rusty Hassan, like Willard Jenkins, like Billy Breyer, about the great historians of music. And music has had that link, and so WPFW has been able to both bring music, but also bring the community together around a lot of programs. Now, sometimes I cut the radio on. I'm in the South, so I say cut instead of turn. So sometimes I cut it on, and sometimes I don't feel like hearing, you know, the rhetoric. You know, so I can turn the station. But when I want to hear the good music, I can turn. And there are many stations like that, WGBO in Newark and Columbia University radio stations. So there are many, and PFW provides just this forum for us to listen to this great black music, you know, of all kinds. And the beauty is that many of the, even more so now than it was 20 years ago, many of the radio hosts really immersed in the music. I got involved because of a man, anybody know the Bama? Anybody remember the Bama? Anybody know the Bama? Jerry Washington? Well, Jerry Washington was a great blues man. He had a girlfriend named Denise, remember that? Well, there really was a Denise. I thought, but anyway, so what happened was—
There's a Lucille, too.
I didn't know about Lucille.
That's B.B. King's guitar.
B.B. King had about 100 Lucilles, as he said. But so Jerry, but Wash was an expert on music. He was in the class of Martin Luther King at Morehouse. But Wash was a very conservative man. He was an Air Force veteran. He was conservative biased, and he became very good friends with Lee Atwater. Leadwater, who was, you know, Bush's, you know, man. But Watts knew the music, and he brought in. You remember he said on Saturday I'm all bib overalls, because he had the other side. You know, he had the, you know, the Bama, who was the blues, and then the other side of the Bama was the class with the jazz and Charlie Parker. And he really knew it, and he would play a song twice or 2 or 3 times, so he could play the different versions of it. And so this is what this station can do, and it's had to expand. It has had to expand to go-go and many other forms, which is just fine.
Let's talk about Edward Henderson. I think his grandson is here. Talk about basketball and Henderson's importance to the history of basketball in D.C.
Well, it's great, and in fact, I brought my copy so Mr. Dr. E.B. Henderson III could sign a book about the great E.B. Henderson, who was from Washington, Southwest, grew up here, and went off and for Harvard for a couple of years, and studied a game that had been created by a man named Naismith. Naismith from, I think, Oklahoma somewhere, from out the Midwestern. But as Mr. E.B. Henderson, he went on and later got his doctorate. He went and studied many forms. He saw sports as not just a form of recreation, but as a form of livelihood, but as a form of the well-being of blacks, and came back and helped really create the first recreation department in D.C. And first, do you know when he first came back after learning the game of basketball, he says something like, boys didn't like basketball. They had too much testosterone. They liked running around all the time. The girls' game was much more beautiful. Did anybody see the games last night? Mm. The game was beautiful. You see this. And so EBN, but then boys, and as he created this game, it's in Washington, it coincides with something else. Because you have sports and music at the same time. And you form these sports leagues. And Duke Ellington said, you know, I used to be a great basketball player, but then I started playing at the True Reformer, and the girls liked the music, so I gave it up. You know, so, but at the True Reformers, you would have kids, and then you would have the games, the Harlan Renaissance team. You had a team of Howard University doctors, and they would play, and they would all play at night in the game. And then after the game is over, they would turn into jam session dances. But E.B. Henderson did this. He brought, and he studied with, I think her name is Mrs. Turner, the school bringing this field of education. See, it's why it's so important. Recreation. Do you know when Reagan made the budget cuts, he made them in two ways. He first cut the music programs. All of us know, anybody over 40, I guess, knows that if you were a kid in the South or somewhere, you had to take some form of music. You took music, whether you were good at it or not, you took. And everybody had PE. But during the Reagan budget cuts, they took PE out of the schools that Mr. Henderson had created and put there. Took PE, and what happened? In the Bronx and in Washington, D.C., 2 things happened. Well, the big thing, the rate of type 2 diabetes went way up. These big McDonald's and things like that, and it had a direct effect. This is also going during the time of the crack epidemic. And then they took music out of the schools. As they took music out of the schools, kids stopped learning how to play. And as they stopped learning how to play, you know, I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong with rap, but people started using the buckets and things like, you know, drywall buckets. Do you remember what we used to drywall buckets for? Mm-hmm. Use it for that, and you go to House of Prayer, and they use them to, you know, for Sweet Daddy Grace, who passed the bucket, and you put your money in it. Fill it up. So the bucket had, but what E.B. Henderson was doing, and then, so he brought all these forms to the game of basketball, football. This is also during a time when a little before, when Fritz Pollard and all the other blacks are playing in these sports, and sports becomes something important. But sports is not, if you look at sports today, and let's say you look at LeBron James. Now, he's not just a great athlete, but the man has studied the game so much when you talk to him about it, you listen to him. 2 people fascinate me in talking about sports, LeBron James and Tom Brady, because they can tell you about every play they played for the last 30 years. See, sports also has to be, you know, tennis and golf. Well, you can be good at it, but if you don't take lessons, you're never going to be great. You can tell me you are. But dinks and curves and all this, you can, now basketball players are learning all these other things from the other sports. So everything is evolving. And so we had this man, E.B. Henderson, who brought this to and then even after he moved to Virginia, he had formed the NAACP there. He was an activist. He and his wife tied in sports And I think Dr. Enzo, you live in the same house, I think I read, that, or live somewhere. And he kept sports in the community. It became such an vital thing. And do you know, I'll end with that, do you know at Cardozo High School and places like I passed by it, I live no far, the fields, all this money, and the fields are pretty much vacant after they play football because we're not using them like we shouldn't. And so E.B. Henderson also was the first to understand the soccer and brought soccer. Soccer was not, black folks didn't play soccer. When they played soccer was when people at the embassies would play. And then soccer came to Washington. And it came to Washington. The big thing, you know why soccer really became so popular in Washington? Is the Howard University teams, which won in 1970 and 72. And they won the national championships. And then what happened as soon as they won? They took it away from them because they said students from other countries were too old and all these lies that they make. And now look at University of St. Louis, look at any team. Look at University of Maryland, Serbia, Croatia, and all this. But they penalized black people when they did it.
I noticed in your book, you don't talk about the Washington Capitals. There's no hockey. Yeah. The Caps joined the National Hockey League as an expansion team in 1974. Mike Morrison was the second black hockey player. Bill Riley was the third. But there's no reference to that in your book. Is it because you don't like hockey?
Well, I don't understand it really. Well, here's the thing about hockey. It's a beautiful sport.
You're supposed to tell me you're going to write another book.
No, because I would never know. You know, it's a beautiful sport if you can see it in person. But you see it on TV. Gretzky made 2 scores last night. I stopped.
It wasn't Gretzky.
Not Gretzky or Ovechkin. Gretzky was there.
Gretzky was there.
Howard wasn't there.
That's because he ran him out of Canada, but that's another story.
But I looked this way, I could not see a thing. The puck, I stopped the thing 2 times. I'm looking for the puck, I couldn't see it. So black folks like something where they can see, but you have to go. That's one reason. Did anybody see when the Capitals won the championship, the parade? I write in this book about several things that brought black people together. And one was not the team itself, but when the teams won. Hundreds of thousands of people black. When the Capitals won, do you know how many people? Did you see the parades? They had very few, they had minorities, but they were all Korean. Because for some reason, Korean people like hockey. I don't understand. And I've asked my friends. But you know, they come. But black folks, when the baseball team won a couple of years ago, I looked at the parade, you didn't have that many blacks there, for whatever reason. And we have to, so maybe it's because I know Ethelbert's a baseball man, maybe we have to bring baseball back into the community, so no, I'm afraid, Ethelbert, I don't have all that much time left, and I'm going to write about.
Well, talk about, in your book, there's some nice pictures. Talk about your own children, Lena and Miles, and how important sports was in their development.
Well, my wife always says the reason I pushed my kids to play sports is because I wasn't good at it. She's part right, and she's part wrong. When I was a kid, I wanted to be Paul Warfield, which is for the Cleveland Browns, great player. But for a couple of years, we lived in Alabama. And my grandmother lived so far from the football field that you'd have to walk home at night. And you don't walk home at night in Alabama because there are no street lights, because you could end up dead next. So she says, if you're going to kill yourself, you kill yourself working, not playing this damn fool game. So I could never. So then I also learned a lot of, because she had the jazz radio things. But I realized when my kids were coming up that sports and music did so much to enhance their lives as going to school. They went to very difficult schools. Well, we lived in a neighborhood that the schools just weren't any good. So what was I going to do? So we hocked the house, refinanced the house, sent the girl to National Cathedral School, the boy to St. Albans. It cost me more to send my kids to high school than it did to college, because Georgetown helped pay for college, but nobody helped pay for those schools. And they were, I remember Gaston Neal, the great poet, said, Maurice, you send your kids to those schools? They won't learn to be black. I said, man, in my house, they're going to learn to be black. I'm not worried about that. Damn, next thing I know, he's sending his kids over there. This is the great poet. But sports did so much. Our son was a wonderful kid, but since he was 5, he had type 1 diabetes, so he's had to take insulin almost every day. But he takes such good care of himself that he would play soccer. He played varsity soccer at the University of Michigan. And then he founded something called Cuba Skate, where he's taken over 10,000 skateboards to Cuba because he was there and he saw these black kids who were, they had nothing to do. because Cuba was so poor, so he skateboards. And the daughter, you know, played, ran track and at Georgetown, and they both played, you know, played in the orchestra, the DC Youth Orchestra, which is probably now. But suppose anybody ever been to Jealous Boys and Girls Club? Well, it is probably the most integrated place in Washington. Because you would see the rich. I remember Franklin Raines, who ran, you know, the housing thing, and Tim Russell, who's on the Face of the Nation, all their kids, and the rich and the poor all went. You put everything down there. And at DC Youth Orchestra, it used to be up in at Coolidge High School. You would go, and they'd have everybody, and it had the kids didn't go to school together, but they played music together because music, sports was a great equalizer. So it was just always very. I know Ethelbert's kids, his son played and became a coach.
There too.
Huh?
My daughter's there. She's a
Oh,
runner.
your daughter? Okay. How are you? He's always showing pictures of your kid. And so they play, you know, and sports just became such an important, you know, thing for us. And then even today, you know, in the cities, the creation of young soccer leagues and soccer teams, kids are not going to, you know, if you want to play basketball, I have kids, a big at Georgetown, they come in. And I had a kid last year, and I said, look, I'm 6'2". If you ain't no bigger than me, son, you're not going to make it unless your name is Iverson, and your name ain't Iverson, so you better study. And see, but sports can get you that education. It has done that. Do you know that at Georgetown, where I teach, if it were not for the young black guys on the football team, the percentage would be way less than 4%. Now, all of them are pretty little, so you know they're not going to make it in the pros. But, you know, you wouldn't come to Georgetown if you want to make it in pro. Maybe in track, maybe in basketball. You know, the coach said, oh, Maurice, we're getting better. Well, everybody's getting better. That doesn't mean nothing. France is getting better. In a couple of years, we're not going to win anything. But sports has done that. Culture, for my own kids, it just helped them so much. And music, the love of music, the love of all different kinds of music. Not just hip-hop and rap, but classical music, jazz, appreciating all those things. It's just so important.
I want to bring you back as we come to the end of our session, and maybe some questions from the audience. How is your historical research different from historians like John Hope Franklin, Carter G. Woodson, Benjamin Quarles, Ron Bennett? Do you see yourself standing on their shoulders, or do you see yourself having perhaps an ideological difference in terms of the interpretation of history? Well,
I'm rather jealous of those gentlemen because they started very young. They started you know, Carter G. Woodson and John Hope Franklin and even Du Bois. And I had been an activist all my life. I had been, you know, I'd certainly seen the world, but I had workerships. And even when I'm in graduate school, I'm working construction. The head of the history department said, well, you can't work in this summer because you're on fellowship. I said, you going to send my kids to summer camp? You going to pay? Well, I'm working. So I work construction. So and so I'm envious of they, but I'm not envious in certain things because I had a chance to see the world and get a broad knowledge. So I like to think I can think as well as any other. It's just different because I sort of look at history through anybody know Antonio Gramsci was the great Italian historian, and he wrote about what he called an organic historian, organic intellectual, which means you learn innately. You learn from things about the quality of life. I saw yesterday David Brooks, who writes New York Times. He said that people's psychology is made by the conditions they live in. Now, this is David Brooks, the conservative. He didn't invent that. Karl Marx said in 1849 in something called a Contribution to Critique of Political Economy that it is not the consciousness of individuals that make their conditions, it's the conditions of individuals that make their consciousness. Therefore, we all are formed by the conditions of which we live in, all of us. And so I've been formed by that, but I can use these. I suppose one difference in me is that I look at people like Eric Lincoln or C.L.R. James or people like that who look at the world in a different sense. But I was lucky when I came to D.C., UDC was right up the street. And do you know who was teaching at UDC? Ira Berlin, David Levering Lewis, and C.L.R. James. And I dropped out of Cop Fest, but I could go there every night, and then I could go listen to Gil Scott-Heron lessons. I could do it all, and I was a college dropout, so I could do that. So in a sense, But no, one must, the beauty of me going back to grad school, you must have a structural way of learning. You must have a way of learning that you learn the basics. I regret that I did not have the opportunity to learn languages. Therefore, my kids had to learn. That I did not, learn, Swahili or French or German and things like that. But I just don't have it. But I can remember facts and things. I just don't have it. So, no, these men and they produce works that, I wrote this book. It's a book on Washington, D.C. It's a wonder critics. He couldn't find anything else. So what they say is, he has too much Du Bois. Why in the world can you have too much Du Bois? You're writing about black people. And I'm writing about Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C. is a city. Do you know Du Bois produced a pageant of 100,000 people came to it at the old U-Line theater. He called it the Ethiopian pageant. He brought all these people because he wrote a play, but they put the music with Samuel Coleridge Taylor, who was the great Nigerian. So you see all of this. So yes, these people, but there's so many others. Angela Davis, who was really my first great intellectual inspiration. So many others, and then you have there's so many young historians now just are doing such such great work. So all of those, you learn from everybody, and I've tended to be able across any field. So.
My last question is, we associate you with DC history, but I also associate you with Haitian history. Is there any connection?
Well, I have a great love of Duke Ellington, and Duke Ellington was not a radical person by any means. Duke Ellington said, "I don't walk because I wear I don't march because I wear $2,000 suede shoes. I got bad feet." But he made good music. Duke Ellington wrote about 8 or 10 tunes dedicated to Africa. But he wrote a tune called Black, Brown, and Beige, and he wrote that dedicated to Henri Christophe, who had been a bootblack in in Lafayette's regiment. Anybody old enough to know that in the 60s and 70s, everybody had a Lafayette in the family. But why? Because of General Lafayette. The city had a commission. The city Washington had a commission, and they want to look at the statues and which ones to take down. And they said, "Well, we're going to take down Lafayette." Why in the world are you taking down Lafayette? This is the one friend you had. But we get right silly. We want to take down Robert E. Lee, but leave Lafayette alone. So anyway, you have this. So Haiti, and then Langston Hughes wrote about Haiti in his poem, and he coincided with the great Leroy and many of the other great. And then the sister for colored girls. This is for colored girls and she dedicated to Toussaint James, because Toussaint James is her Toussaint Louverture. And you have all of this. And then I went back and looked at all the great writers who wrote about Haiti. And all of them, Harley and Jefferson, all of them wrote legacies about, and so the Haitian Revolution. And here's the beauty of the Haitian Revolution, is that there were, of course, 3 great revolutions, the American, the French, and the Haitian Revolution learned from all of those. But when the Haitian Revolution learned too much from the American and French Revolution, it was too much for Jefferson, and Jefferson would not allow this country to be independent. So Haiti represents, and that is why today when we think about Haiti, we think about, do you know that Haiti, when it nationalized countries, it paid France indemnities for 150 years, never missed one payment, never missed one payment. And in 1914, the American government sent in troops claiming that the Haitians were aligning with Hitler. And of course, what a big lie. But that was the youth, and they took all the money out of the Haitian banks. And Haitian, you remember what? You remember Falwell a couple of years ago when Falwell started attacking Haiti because they said they made a deal with the devil because the Haitians were trying to, Aristide and others were trying to come back to power. So Haiti, and I don't know of any country, seen a lot in life, I don't know of any country that has suffered so much from the time of the Bonaparte taking over, to the disease, to every natural calamity, to every tree has been cut so the land just was, to the UN soldiers who go in and defecate and take diseases. She has just been a country and just really needs our help. But Haiti has also been a beacon light in the history of people fighting for independence.
Well, you've been a beacon of light for us this afternoon. No worries, Jackson. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, questions?
Good afternoon. Thank you for such a thought-provoking, fantastic conversation. I was just wondering, do you think that music education, I know you mentioned it was cut starting under Reagan, do you ever think it might make its way back into the schools? Is there a possibility, do you think?
Well, yeah, all the school board has to do is say yes. But the school board has, you know.
What, Marie, can you use the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think so. And I think it is coming. I know at Duke Ellington, places like that, some of these marching bands, have you ever seen some of these school marching bands, Baloo and others? Oh, yeah. But kids have to want to, you know, rent instruments. And it's not the easiest thing because you have to stay after school. You have to do all that. Yeah, I think it will come. But then, you know, we've had to realize that hip-hop and other forms of music, all music, they're going to stay there. And so kids can go now. I mean, you can get a scholarship going to Juilliard with hip-hop, you know, if you want to, if you can get it. So now I think it, but the city has to care much about that as they care about other things. A man making some resolution, making D.C. the sports capital, you dummy. Why don't you manage music? I don't know if any, but you know, pretty much you have to take music classes. You have to take music appreciation classes, and you can make it interesting. But you just have to use different forms. Maybe you won't use Shostakovich or Bach or Brahms, but you can still make that interesting. If anybody ever seen Wynton Marsalis give a lecture on music,
Excellent.
he is fantastic. The brother breaks it down. And when you hear him talk about the importance of classical music, things like that, we need just more of that. Denise Graves and others come back to Ellington, but they need to go back to these other schools. I think it's very important to the mental health of our people and the people in general.
Okay. Any other questions? This one there.
Hi. I read a few years ago John Thompson's book, I Came as a Shadow, which was really informative for me. And I think I just wanted to know, I guess, what your impression of his impact on Georgetown and DC at the time when he was coming up, and then what his absence has been like since he's kind of stepped out of the shadow, or obviously he's since passed now.
Thank you. You know, so I have a class, I must have like 30, 40 football players, big guys, and they're black, white, Hispanic, and so they have to read this book. But the book is a book about, there's so many lessons about lessons. John Thompson talks about the first time he ever met a white person. He was like 14. He has all these, he says, my father taught me the best lesson I ever learned. You know what that was, he says? Study the white man. And so he had all of these things. He talks about it growing up poor, because his father was from Southern Maryland, couldn't read and write. And his father would stand behind him and his sister every day and wait till they finished eating, and then would eat the crumbs. He said he had a third grade education, so it reminded me of my grandmother, but was the smartest man he ever met. And Thompson's full of those lessons. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, because Thompson is a man who has such faith in the American capitalist system that has done well for him and some players. He's been on Nike board and all these things. He's done very well in that sense. And once the New York Times called me a couple of years ago, and Thompson said something, and they asked me to comment. And then they called the next day and asked me to comment on Maya Angelou. I said, let me tell you something. I will comment on anybody, but I will never comment on those two, because you never win. Maya Angelou and John Thompson, I'll talk to you every time. They're going to win. And so, but Thompson, you know, think what he did. He was a part of the integrated basketball teams only because he went to Catholic schools. And when he went to Catholic schools, but he learned also under the great Bill Russell. And he has so many lessons. You should read the book. He talks about, Louis Armstrong talks about being raised, in part by the Kosofsky camp family. And he wore a Star of David around his neck every night. Armstrong talked about Marty and Robbie, somebody in Boston, because no families would allow black people to stay in their houses Bill Russell had money. Thompson didn't have any money, so he stayed in the house of this young Jewish couple. So he talks about the fight against anti-Semitism, things like that. There's so many lessons, but there's also many lessons about the class nature of Washington, D.C. Because when I came to Washington, D.C., it was the most bifurcated city, you know, class-wise. Some light-skinned people just didn't, if they had the money, just didn't want anything to do with it. Some people were educated. I went to here, I went to Dunbar, I went here, and then, you know, some people didn't speak to me until I became Dr. Jackson. Well, I don't need you to speak to me, not now, I'm all right. But it was a very bifurcated city. In some ways, it still is. But when Marion Barry ran for office, he did not get the upper elite black votes. Sterling Tucker got that. Walter Washington got the working class black votes. And Marion Barry got the white vote and the gay vote, which is just fine, but that's how he won. It's documented 30, 30, and 30. So you see, Thompson talks about all that, the D.C. that he grew up in. And our sports, therefore, became because he was big. And then, of course, he protested many things. He protested when they want to have Proposition 42, which blacks had to have a certain grade score, SAT score, just to get in college. And he says, I was as smart as anyone else, but I probably couldn't have passed the test. And he talks about the importance of one person having faith in you. See, I don't care what anybody tells you. You got to get a break. Some people are break because they maybe have money. Somebody looked at him somewhere. But he talks about this woman named Mrs. Samitha Jackson, who says, and he said, John's not dumb, he just can't read. And so by learning, and people learn different and things like that. So he is just a level of that type. It's a wonderful book. I Came After Shadow is a play written by his uncle, who was gay, in Boston, in New York, who wrote this play during the Harlem Renaissance. So it's a book about sports, of Washington, D.C., about black men, about family, about economics. There's many stories. And Jesse Washington, who's a writer, just a wonderful young man, who just wrote, and I've gotten to know him quite well, just wrote a wonderful book working with me. And it wouldn't be easy working with John Thompson, but he did.
Any other questions?
Actually, thank you.
One more question.
Oh.
Hello, my students left because they have to catch the bus, but my question is more like an advice for a young DC high school student with the administration coming with Trump and all of that. I find it at times a little difficult to have conversations with my students. So that's why I bring them to events like this. So what is one advice that you could give a high school student in DC right now?
Well, I could give you a piece of advice. I don't know but I would say shelter them. Don't let them think that it's their burden to carry, because it's not. It is not their responsibility. It's our responsibility. And these kids need to be made safe and need to know that they can study. And importance is just to study and work hard. And it will pay off over time. But they have to, because it's going to get harder. Because they go, anything about diversity, but it'll come back, but it may be too. So, and then just shelter them and give them as much love in sports, and my kids. We lived in Columbia Heights. We lived there, and it was sort of but my kids, mainly because my wife, my kids never once said to me, "Well, we don't have this, or we don't have that." We had an old beat-up car. Never. Because they knew their mother and father were, and they knew I wasn't going to listen. The mother, I wasn't going to listen to it, but the mother. But they knew that we did the best, and never. I mean, whatever problems I had, never had that, because they had the life. And maybe because we both grew up. My wife's father died when she was 5. My mother and father. So for us, just being there for them was everything. I would say make sure talk to the parents, and the most important thing, if there are 2 parents, even if one. Make sure they have dinner every night at the same time, where they can sit down and eat and have discussions and talk to them about what their day is. But we can't put any burdens on them. This stupidity is not theirs. Just stay out of trouble. That's all I would say.
There we go. Yes, much better. Thank you, Karen. So we serve as I'm with the DC History Center, and we serve as the co-presenter of the DC History Conference alongside the DC Public Library and Humanities DC. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so very much, Maurice and Ethelbert, for joining us today. Another round of applause for a really wonderful talk. So you will be glad to hear that this conversation was recorded, and it will be available on YouTube, and specifically on the DC History Center YouTube channel. So check it out there, and please feel free to share that with the folks who couldn't join us today. In addition, Maurice's book is available for sale. Solid State Books has joined us today, and I believe they're available upstairs, and Maurice has kindly agreed to sign his book as well. So that's great news. I want to also express my thanks to Letitia Woods Brown's wonderful family, Dwight and Lucy. It's so great to have you with us every year. This lecture has just become such an important anchor tradition in the DC History Conference, and I just love seeing you every year and having you with us. So, in honor of Letitia, yes. It can be multiple times a year, yes. So I'd like to ask for your attention for a few extra minutes. I don't typically do this, but this is a really exceptional set of circumstances this year. But let me tell you a little bit about what we do, and I have a reason for doing this. So the DC History Center preserves, honors, and uplifts the full range of community stories that unfold in the nation's capital, stories like today. And together with all of you, we shine a light on DC's triumphs and shortcomings, as well as instances of resistance, resilience, and communal cooperation, like we heard about. And with the DC History Conference each spring, we serve as a welcoming convener. We use the tools of history to put you in conversation with each other. And we urge you, as citizens and neighbors, to use the insights that you gain here to support a city where we can all thrive in every aspect of life. And strange, feels rather controversial to say all that, and I've never felt that before. And I won't hide from you that these are difficult times to be doing this work. The federal government, I've newly learned, has long tentacles that reach down into every aspect of heritage-based organizations, whether they receive federal funding or not. And if you think history is important, and if you are here today, I'm guessing that you do, then I feel that it is my responsibility, even just briefly, to update you on the attack our field is experiencing right now, this week, in real time. Museums, libraries, and cultural organizations have historically received funding from three federal agencies. They're very small within the context of the federal budget, but they are mighty. These are the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Endowment for the Arts. They are more than just funders. They are also thought leaders. They set the highest standards for our discipline nationwide, and they help us all do our very best work. All three agencies are under threat right now. On Tuesday, we learned that the staff of the Institute of Museum and Library Services had been put on leave, the entire staff, shutting down all of its grant programs. This decision will have a major impact and it's already started, at our cherished DC Public Library, which receives significant funding, over $1 million from IMLS. This week, the New York Times reported that deep cuts were being mandated at the National Endowment for the Humanities. And this is directly affecting Humanities DC, as you heard from Rebecca a few minutes ago, which serves as the district's humanities council and therefore receives significant funds from the endowment. I've also talked to colleagues who formerly worked at the National Endowment for the Humanities as of the beginning of this week and were fired in an email at midnight. So, or put on an administrative list, whatever you want to call it. So lastly, the American Alliance of Museums has announced that it is expecting an executive order to be signed anytime, targeting the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. And make no mistake, we will soon see devastating results at museums, libraries, and arts organizations in DC and across the country. nonprofit organizations that serve communities, urban and rural, rich and poor, with nothing but devotion, care, and love of country. The loss of programs, services, and jobs will be felt deeply. It goes without saying that this is a dire turn of events in our democracy, a moment when intellectual freedom, scholarly inquiry, and free speech are being subjected to outright censorship. I don't typically use this bully pulpit to comment on current events, and I so appreciate you giving me this time and space to contextualize what it means to gather today. Rebecca, as you said so beautifully, to be together here at Martin Luther King Memorial Library in conversation with one another about DC history is to stake a powerful claim for the values and norms that we hold dear: justice, fairness, and the dignity of human life. Meetings and gatherings like these are crucial to the fight ahead. By sharing our stories with one another and affirming their importance, with love and joy and care, we are reminded that we are a strong and resilient community and that we are in this together. And I have felt in my conversations with all of you over the last few days that joy and that passion and that care for being together. And that gives me hope and strength to move ahead. So through thick and thin, federal funding or not, we will remain committed and true to the work of uplifting and celebrating our hometown, DC. So let's keep going, don't stop, keep going. So thank you. I want to make just two last points. And I wasn't going to do this, but a member of an attendee here really said, Laura, you got to do this. If you care about your humanities organizations and you want to help them get through this moment, then make a gift. Make a donation, renew your membership, whether it's Humanities DC or the DC Public Library Foundation or the DC History Center. We all need you right now. So thank you for thinking about that. And I do want to recognize some folks who very generously supported this conference by adopting a session. So let me just read out this quick list with a sort of a heart full of gratitude and love. To the Albert H. Small Center for National Capital Area Studies, Brian Green, Chris Wolf and Jim Beller, the DC Preservation League, the DC League of Women Voters, Denise Vaught and Frank Leone, EHT Traceries, the Hyrick House Museum, Joseph Creech, Rahul Amin Quander, who's with us. Hi, Rahul Amin. And the White House Historical Association. These are all individuals and organizations who've made this incredible event, this moment that we're together possible. And so I'm grateful to you for all the work that you do and all the ways in which we support each other. See you tomorrow morning.